already been out here on the stage, haven't I, fussing with my talk. You have no idea how nervous I am because of all you people out there. I will get into this, but a quick shout out to my Frontline and Nova folks who also did the Greenland melt, worked with us on partnership on the Greenland melting piece that's here. And I'm going to go ahead and launch in just to say that there's some older material in here because I knew there'd be some people who didn't know about the early days of this work, but we move into new stuff relatively quickly. So please hang in if you've already seen some of these things. And here we go. Where's my clicker? In my pocket.
The real VR pioneer, Nonny de la Peña.
What if I could present you a story that you remember with your entire body and not just with your mind? So what'd you think? Oh, you're crying. With VR, virtual reality, I can put you on scene in the middle of the story. You get this whole body sensation.
There's a bunch of cops here. They're like standing around, something's going on.
Oh, right here. That's not cool.
On the other side of a fence, there's all these people just like kicking and beating.
We can have what I call this duality of presence, a real feeling as if you're in the middle of something that you normally see on TV news. So I started applying all these ideas to what I named immersive journalism. And we all know being there is the most important part of understanding almost anything that's happening. Along in a partnership with America's premier investigative documentary series, Frontline, who had incredible access on solitary confinement cells. What that is photogrammetry. And it's exact photographs of a cell. You are walking around the exact cell, the exact footprint. You are in the room. This works so well for putting people on scene at real stories. So then what? You got to put the people in there. How do you do that? I can now put you in the room with somebody who is videotaped in volume. You can literally walk around them in a volumetric way.
Emblematic is among the world's leading producers of virtual and augmented reality, with more than 10 years of experience. We create innovative, high-impact, immersive media, ranging from emotionally powerful stories for media companies, brands, and global culture, to OTT solutions for world-class partners in business-to-business virtual reality distribution. Let your audience experience your message in a deeply powerful and intimate experience. Don't just tell your story, live it.
Okay, so where did I start from? I want to talk about this crazy project we did where I went into a suit and then drove a robot in search of new ways of doing journalism.
Do you hear me now, Nonny?
Mucho gusto, eh?
Nice to meet you. Molt de gust.
Yes. I'm from Los Angeles, California.
Welcome to Barcelona. Benvinguda a Barcelona. I don't know, Nonny, if I could ask you to raise your arms. A veure si pot aixecar els braços. Ja veieu que els aixeca. Keep them up, because now we'll show the robot. I ara anirem a veure el robot, que ja veieu. Can you move them a little bit more? A veure si els pot moure una mica més. Up and down. Doncs ja veieu que el robot reacciona perfectament amb la Nonny. Nonny, I'm ready to interview you now for a few minutes. Li farem una entrevista a la Nonny per veure què li ha semblat aquesta experiència. You're a journalist, ella és una periodista, i fa una estona ha entrevistat un científic de Barcelona. You just interviewed a researcher from Barcelona, but in a body of a robot. What was that experience like?
So for me, it starts to feel very natural after a while. Occasionally, there's some problems with the eye movement in my head if I move too fast. But beyond that, very quickly, I'm there in Barcelona with you.
So I was in that robot suit for quite a few hours. And I had a very strange sensation when I came out of it because I ended up watching very shortly afterwards somebody else in that robot suit. It was somebody else inside the body of that robot. And I really had this crazy, weird sensation of like, ew, what is she doing inside my body, right? You know, this was like part of this journey of trying to figure out how to be, you know, two places at once. So I went to Venice High School in Venice, California. We were supposed to be rowing, not drifting. This was the kind of look of the bathrooms of the school that I grew up in, right? And that white cage that you see right there, that had a statue of a woman named Myrna Loy, who was a famous actress in the 40s, some of you may know. And the senior class's thing was to somehow decapitate Myrna Loy or destroy her in some way. There was this big report that they'd used dynamite to blow off her head, and then some football player drunkenly told me that they'd actually used a sledgehammer. But that was kind of the school kind of feel, right? And they finally put this white cage around her, but then somebody stuffed newspapers in and lit it on fire. So there was really no protecting Myrna at Venice High. When I was 17 in my senior year, I got accepted to Harvard. And I'd never been to the East Coast, and I showed up without a coat and boots, and I had to just figure it out, right? My family didn't know, and I didn't know. And that year they had to require that you take a basic programming course. And I was actually pretty good at it, and I was teaching all my friends, but because I was so unprepared, I didn't pursue it. And I just didn't feel comfortable walking into a room in which I was the only woman. Then CompuServe came out. I gravitated towards email. I won their award for best use of CompuServe for tracking down individuals from many decades earlier who had been involved in a case when Ted Kennedy drove a car off a bridge in Chappaquiddick. Then came the book that Howard Rheingold wrote, Virtual Reality. And if some of you know, that book was early 90s, and I was like, wow, that is what I want to do with my life. And I just didn't know how to do it. I didn't know what to do to get there. At that point, I'd become a correspondent for Newsweek. Had left Newsweek to make documentary films. I was trained really very much as a professional journalist. And in this documentary, I had a long segment on Gitmo, and we had this family friend who used to call NPR and say, hey man, what about that great story on Guantanamo Bay Prison? And they'd go, what story? And he'd go, exactly. And I sort of felt the same way, even though I'd made the film in 2003. And really, honestly, it's relevant again, right? We just are locking people up and never letting them out and not giving them a trial. So using my segment of Gitmo in that film, we got a grant from the MacArthur Foundation and something called the Bay Area Video Coalition to translate an existing project into digital media. And the point was like looking into how do you report on a destination when you're denied access. So along with digital artist Peggy Weil, we built a virtual but accessible version of the prison in contrast to the real but inaccessible version of the prison camp. And it was really built in 2007, right? So here we are a decade later, and we could still be using this as an educational place. Really depressing. And then it got invited to the Moscow Museum of Modern Art, and I wanted to rebuild it in Unity, which is the game engine that drives a lot of these VR pieces. So I really had to become a better C# coder. I had to really not, walk away this time. So wouldn't it have been nice if this was the room I walked in? At this point, I'm a research fellow at USC, so I've gone to the engineering school to take a class. This is a stock photo. This is what the room was really like. So 32 guys, right? Eventually one woman kind of appeared. I don't think she stayed, I'm not sure. The sort of joke I tell is that I heard one of the guys turn to another guy, like, hey man, you really got to come to my party tonight. There's going to be real girls there. So it wasn't always the greatest for them either. But I, this time, was not walking out. I was really going to learn my C#. I also relied a lot on this guy, Berg Zergarcade, who you can still find up on YouTube. His classes on YouTube were some of the best to teach me the kind of coding in Unity that I really wanted in order to pursue forward. And also, I wrote to the head of Unity and was like, I'm going to Moscow. And he immediately turned around and gave me a free version, professional version, so I didn't have to have student, unofficial version all over the bottom of my piece going into Moscow. In any case, how was that piece built? Well, we were using real imagery, and we tried to make it look, as much as possible to the real prison. We also put you in a legal black hole. And what does that mean? Well, you'd query the wall. Can I call my family? No, you can't call your family. Can I call my lawyer? No, you can't call your lawyer. What does it mean to really lose your habeas corpus rights? And that's what it means. It means you can't get any information. You don't know what's going to happen to you, right? So at the same time, I was taking students into Second Life because I was a researcher at USC. So I wanted to do a little bit of research about sexual harassment in Second Life, right? Because if I was going to bring people there, I wanted young women there. I wanted to know what they were going to be looking at. So we did a survey and found that indeed it was pretty brutal. I was rounded up, virtually raped repeatedly. One shocked me. Third time it's a place called Ben's Garage. Someone attached a giant penis over my head, and I couldn't get rid of it. And here's a video of like the kind of ridiculous stuff that was going on, right? Yeah, the flying penis trick, right? Anyway, so, but what I was interested in was like looking at, did women feel sexually harassed in these environments? And we found that the research is pretty clear. Offline situations, bulletin boards, comments, etc., women feel harassed more than men do. And I found the same thing in Second Life. But as I was looking at the data, I realized we asked people what the gender was of their avatar versus what was the real world gender, right? And it was a kind of extraordinary thing. We didn't have a huge amount of players, but we had enough that showed that when males played using a female avatar, they felt significantly more harassed than females do. So that's pretty amazing. Why? I didn't ask, because I wasn't really actually going out to look for that. I just happened to have the data to pull that together. Was it because I weren't used to it? I don't know. But it was a pretty interesting bit of information. And I have to say, this is at this point, Second Life, you're just looking through a digital window, right? A computer. So like, what is it about even looking at that? I think you're really hardwired to have this like, digital representation of yourself as being incredibly powerful. The sense of presence is really quite powerful. Mel Slater and Maria Sanchez Vives call it, who are researchers in Barcelona, rare response as if real. And we just are hardwired to adopt those representations of ourselves as real. So here's a video I like to show a lot. I don't think I have a pointer, but if you look at the, he's seeing himself from behind. Those goggles show the viewpoint from that video camera behind him. And they brought a hammer down in front of that video camera, and he jumped because he felt like he was where he saw himself to be, rather than, even though he was seeing his back, than where he was. So like where he was seeing made him have a sense of where he was. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with this really interesting study that came out of Duke. They were taking paraplegics and they were trying to get them to use brain-computer interface devices to move their limbs. But bizarrely, after a year of being in an Oculus Rift, they actually regained some new synapses to control their bodies, completely unexpectedly. They formed new synapses, imagining their body doing things. Now, they didn't get up and walk, but they did get control over when they did their bowel movements, et cetera, which is a quality of life issue that's really important. So that's a super interesting study, and we'll see what comes more out of that. So these are the kind of embodiment things that I began to apply more and more for journalism. Some of you may know about the hunger in the Golden State. We talked a little bit in our opening video. I was working research fellow at USC, and the students were putting together a kind of more traditional journalistic piece. Now it would be traditional. Video, photos, web-based, browser-based. You can see this published in March of 2010. And I asked the students, hey, who wants to do a VR piece with me? And they were like, VR, what are you talking about? So nobody would help me, but I found a high school student who was an intern, who became my intern. And she went out to this food bank line, and she was there. We were together recording audio, and she was there from, by the way, no GoPros really to film things, so there's no even 360 cameras yet. So she recorded a moment where a man with diabetes, waiting in a long line here for food, collapsed because his blood sugar dropped too low. And when she came back to my office crying, that's when I decided to work with that piece. Oh, are you not going to play for me? You are, because I just tested you before. That was what I was doing up here. Okay, so how did I make that piece?
Vital 02 to no, take 4.
No budget, I had $700, and I needed to recreate the entire scene, right? So this is the motion capture of a guy named John Brennan, and you'll hear Bradley Newman in the background. He's playing the food bank lady, and I'm having to direct we had all night in the stage, that's all we had, one night, and I had to direct him to play every person in that line, including the kid and the seizure victim, right? But we were using photographs and audio that was real, right? So we were really making our best to add some realism to it. And this is what we produced. And that's the real audio.
Okay, he's having a seizure.
Okay. So that guy was in the room. You also might want to notice that that's the director, Alejandro Gonzalez Iñárritu, which is, I'll talk a little bit more about, but this is his first exposure to VR. And he's very careful not to step on the body. So this gets into Sundance, January of 2012. The only headset in the room is the Wide 5, a $50,000 headset, the head of the lab's like, you're not taking that anywhere. So we had to make goggles, and this was the room at the time, talented guy named Tai Fan, and a kid kicking around who was actually at Long Beach State, working there part-time, would be called the lab intern, who had making goggles in his garage. And this is what we showed up with, this big, huge monster. This was opening night. I just didn't know how people were going to react. None of us knew, actually. This was a new experience for us all. But you can see she's down with the seizure victim. She was crying. She's trying to talk to him, even with all that crazy-ass contraption on their head. Just like Alejandro, very involved, even though he's got that crazy contraption on his head. And just another look at this for historical purposes. You'll see it says PR4 HMD, and it's got the words Palmer Luckey under there. He was crushed in the hotel room driving the truck back. And if you know Palmer, 9 months later, he started Oculus Rift. And then 3 years later, he sold it to Facebook for $3 billion, 2.5 years later. I don't think he was old enough to drink yet. And then he got put on this cover of Time magazine, right, which introduced this whole new phenomenon for us. But I just want to have to call out not one woman was mentioned in that article, right? It did become the most memed cover of Time magazine, so there's some satisfaction in that, I guess. And a little bit more about the Alejandro. That piece also informed Alejandro and his colleague, Chivo, who worked very closely with him on lots of things to make a piece of Carne Arena, which has been sold out at LACMA and other places around the world for at least 6 months, 7 months now. It's launched in July. You can't get tickets still. So that's super cool. And then they gave Alejandro a special award. They made their first VR Oscar this year for that piece. And that's why in that opening thing, when he gives me a shout out for being the real pioneer, it came at that event, which was super cool. But here you go. Why did Alejandro make the piece the way he did? It's a full walk around with sand and huge room, et cetera. Because Alejandro, having been through our lab where you walked around, was like me, the DK1 that first came out, the Oculus first headset. You could only sit down. I didn't want to sit down. So first I tried stapling trackers to my Oculus. That's Oculus number 154. You can see I probably screwed up the resale value. But then we started 3D printing our own. And we also had to make our own controllers at this point. And why did I want to make such a walk-around experience? I just felt it was more powerful. To tell stories like this one about this man, Anastasio Hernandez Rojas, who had been brought to the United States as a young boy, and I'd never been in trouble with the law, and on Mother's Day during the downturn, he stole a bottle of tequila and a steak for his wife, got busted, got deported, and tried to re-enter the country, and we tried to sneak back in. He was beaten up by the Border Patrol. When he complained, they took him to a dark pen. And we rebuilt it again using audio and video from captured by 2 people who happened to be on scene. The Border Patrol was grabbing people's cameras, so only 2 people that we know of actually managed to get out of there with material. And we brought it to BuzzFeed. And they made a little video about this. And just saying, I've got a lot of new material coming up as well, if you've already seen this film. So I was told to do some background as well.
I don't even know what these are. I guess cameras?
Looks like somebody's gonna shock me.
That guy's holding a lightsaber back there. I think virtual reality really is like the next big thing. I think it's the new video game or whatever that means.
It's so weird. There's like all these people and I'm like, what is about to happen?
How's this look with my hair? Pretty good, right?
Oh, got it. Whoa!
This is going to simulate a cell phone, so it's going to be when you press this button here, and you hold it up in front of you, a cell phone will appear, and you'll have 60 seconds to record whatever you want before your battery dies.
Oh, I see. Oh my God. That's even crazier.
All right, so there's a bunch of cops here. They're like standing around something's going on.
Oh, right here. That's not cool.
Like on the other side of a fence, there's all these people just like kicking and beating this man, and he's screaming.
Look at this. And nobody's doing anything about it. Of course nobody's doing anything about it, right? Of course. Because that's what people do. They just watch. It's kind of messed up. Oh, here we go.
I couldn't tell before, but I think he's handcuffed.
I'm looking above. I'm seeing the horror.
Hey, we're recording you.
Already not moving, but there's like 5 dudes beating him.
Same thing, they just are not stopping. I don't know, I mean, I can't believe that like is real.
Did not expect a recreation of a real life beating.
I thought it was going to be some sort of, possibly some, you know, entertaining game. That was not the case.
You feel kind of like helpless and isolated.
Hopefully in that situation you actually would be able to like somehow stop it, but I do think like the next best thing is recording it.
I wonder what I would really do. Like, I know you want to say stuff, it's okay to say stuff, but it's like, I don't have the power to go and arrest the police. Maybe that's problematic.
I think when you see something like that, you're like, wow, that was horrible, but at least like the one comfort that I have is like the United States justice system will do something about it, and like people that do bad things get punished for that. And then like what we've been seeing the past few weeks is like sometimes that doesn't happen.
The thing that was really sort of disorienting is that it wasn't one cop doing it and his partner, it was all these other cops sort of standing around and watching.
I think
so. Sxsw died from his being beaten to death that night. And that case did not get reported at all, barely. Tiny little blurb. But now that BuzzFeed thing has got almost 1 million views. So even though I'm showing it to you guys again, if you've already seen it, I feel like it's a case that you can't ever, you know, forget. So showing it more than once, I'm sorry. But that also generated pages and pages and pages of discussion on race in America. And then, of course, I have to include this very funny one. Damn, I Googled use of Force VR, expecting someone being a Jedi in VR, not what I expected. So a little bit more on this woman, Ashley, who recorded the material from above that showed how many officers were involved in the beating. I brought her to our light stage at USC with Paul Devevic, and this is what they do. Those are all cameras taking photographs of her from every angle, right? I also brought her into a motion capture suit so that she could reenact what she did that night with her body. I was walking along, I looked over the thing, I was filming, I was recording, and so I could put her in as herself, and instead of being a witness who you're like, then tell me your story in a camera way, she was there telling her story with her body as much as with her words. I was also invited to do a piece about projects about Syria, and I'll show you a quick trailer on that. This was the first piece on Syria in 2012. No, sorry, 2013 is when we were making this. So again, we try to have really detailed Bibles to show you where we got our source material from, to make sure we're down to the rubble. We've got it reproduced digitally correctly. It went to the Davos World Economic Forum, world leaders like John McCain there, and yet we still have Syria. Like, deep breath on that one. It went to the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. You know, again, we had this crazy, huge equipment with those lights, but people came. And it wasn't advertised. It just wasn't advertised. But for me, it was like a major validation, because after 5 days, they had, I think, like 64 pages of guest book comments, most outpouring they'd seen, you know, absolutely amazing, completely immersed, something you would see, it's like something you'd see normally on TV news, etc., absolutely believable. And the most important one was this was a very difficult piece to experience as a Syrian whose family is still living in alms. Although I felt the piece was inappropriate at first, I've certainly changed my mind after experiencing it firsthand. It's important for the world to bear witness to the situation in Syria, and this is a powerful and effective way to do that.
This is Charleston County 911. We received a call from this number. Is everything okay?
My nephew's on the phone. He just called. I asked us to come to their house because my sister, baby daddy, has a gun on her.
So that's Kia. In Kia, we're using audio to reconstruct very, very carefully. You can see the crime scene on the left, on the right, and it tells the story of a woman named Kia who, and her two sisters who try unsuccessfully to rescue her from a fatal attack by an ex-boyfriend, and trying to deal with the fact that 3 women a day are killed by their ex-partners or their partners. The piece ends up being pretty significant, even though it's digital. With Planned Parenthood, we did a piece called Across the Line, looking at how do young women get treated when they're trying to go into clinics. We tried to scan folks to make it more realistic. And then what did? We took real audio and we had to motion capture it to put it into people. And this was the sort of thing that gets yelled at young women when they're waiting to go into a healthcare clinic.
You're a whore. You're a whore. You're a whore. You're a little whore. How about stop being a whore? You whore. Shame on you. Start closing your legs. Start having some respect for your body. Maybe your parents should have aborted you.
So when you go into the piece, it's the kind of thing that gets yelled at you. But here's the amazing thing, that once the piece was done, research was done on what was the effect of that piece. And it was pretty amazing as a bridge. People had seen, Across the Line, they were less tolerant of a range of clinic harassment. And in fact, they found that those with moderate and conservative views had increased empathy towards women. 3/4 said they would support legislation that keeps protesters away from clinics. And 2/3 said they were more likely to support candidates who would support access. So that's a pretty significant finding from a VR piece. And these are folks, again, moderate conservative views. They've seen photos and video and audio and newspapers and web pieces and stuff. So the VR piece actually was a significant shift. Similarly, we worked on a piece on LGBTQ homelessness. Some 40% of homeless youth in America come from the LGBTQ community because they're thrown out by their families. And in this case, we're telling the story of a kid named Daniel, which I'll let this little video tell you about it. "40% of homeless youth come from the LGBTQ community because they've been thrown out from their homes due to their sexual orientation. After I gave my talk at TED Women, the actress Sara Ramirez approached me, and she really wanted to make this piece about homelessness in the LGBTQ community. In collaboration with the True Colors Fund, I was lucky enough to begin working with them on finding the right material to tell the story. We ended up using the audio of Daniel Pierce, who was thrown out by his own family, and he happened to record the terrible confrontation that ensues.
Oh, get off of me! What's wrong with you?
You're a damn queer, you
What's wrong with you?
So by putting the audience in the middle of this physical moment, using the motion capture, putting on digital characters, and then making it life-size so it happens all around you, it's so startling. Suddenly this thing you've heard, which is disturbing enough, and maybe you've watched videos of this type of scene, but if it's there and you feel physically vulnerable, you connect to Daniel and to what he's going through in a way that I don't think any other medium affords. It is a really significant and powerful moment to be there with Daniel when he's that vulnerable, when he's surrounded by people who hate him just for being who he is.
You're twisting my words. You are a completely different person.
Let me tell you something, you little pieces.
So, do we have some fun at Emblematic? Yes, because I think it's time I'll do a couple little lighter pieces. We got invited by Standard Chartered Bank to do a piece at the Singapore Formula One Grand Prix. And we're still making headsets there. But then we put you on scene in the middle of the pit crew, and then you had to drive the car. And you can see that people had a lot of fun. So just so we can have a little bit of fun here. And this was the son of the boss, of the big dude who hired us. And they were testing it out the day before. And I don't know whether, they hadn't paid us fully yet. So, but when the kid went in there and was like in the middle of the pit crew and kind of comes out going, "This is so cool. So cool, I knew I was going to get paid." So, this is how we were tracked. It was 2 people, which was new. Like nobody had done that before in VR. We had these cars, and you were racing against each other, and these CEOs who were coming for the event could find each other. Quick talk about kinematic versus cinematic. A lot of people know about using 360 video, which plays back on these headsets, and these are all the kind of crazy camera configurations you're seeing. And it's very beautiful and realistic. This was a piece we shot in the Nuba Mountains, the New York Times and Arte have put up by some very, very talented folks, Trevor and Sam, who were out there all the time in the mountains. But anyway, with 360 video, you can't ever get any closer to your hand, right? It's still 360 video. So I really want to be able to do, like we said earlier, the photogrammetry, to make things in volume. And we've been pushing and pushing that envelope. So what you're seeing on the left are the photographs. Each click is a photograph. And what you're seeing in the middle is the output. And these are the algorithmic outputs of how you can make a statue, right? That's without cleanup. You see those little bits flying around. They need to be cleaned up in something like ZBrush. But the technology of just taking that many photographs and being able to make models that have volume, it's kind of been a dream come true. So I got invited by a bipartisan committee looking into the establishment of a women's history museum, and they wanted me to make a piece for the report requesting that this be allowed. And I picked this amazing woman, newspaper editor and newspaper printer. She was asked to print the first official Declaration of Independence, which listed the guys' names, because before that it was treason and nobody wanted their name on there. And at the very bottom, she put her full name, Mary Catherine Goddard, and she'd never done that in any of her newspapers before. So basically she signed the Declaration of Independence. And she was so badass that in 1816, when she died, she freed her slave and left her all her money. But I had no budget. There's my very tiny, itty-bitty, literally this one, just nothing. Because sadly, some friends were doing a fundraiser, and then the husband of one died in the middle of this. But anyway, so we needed a revolutionary printing press room. And this was one in historic Deerfield. So we wouldn't use that process of all those photographs to make an environment that was realistic, and then we used that volumetric capture system to bring people in. So you could walk around that printing press area now, right? We did a similar thing where this was for the LA Museum of the Holocaust, where we start capturing people in volume. Can you turn that up a little bit?
And then we went back to our cabin, to our blocks.
So this is what the actual photogrammetry of a solitary cell up in Maine that Frontline had access to. But again, that is all stitched together from photographs. That is not a video. That's somebody walking on a headset, and that volumetric space, that whole spatial area, is stitched together all through photographs, right? You can actually walk around and be in the cell. And how we got somebody in there to tell their story, that was Kinney with 8i. We volumetrically captured through many, many, many photographs. When
I walked
we were able to put up a trailer that got 2 million views for this piece.
5.5 years of my life in solitary confinement. I look fine, but I'm not. 18 years old, I was new to the system, never really been in trouble before. As an adult, the solitary confinement and
so now you're going to be in that cell with him.
Years of it drove a relatively sane young man insane. Cut myself thousands of times, just over and over.
And when you're in the room with him talking about that and he's next to you, it just has a very different feel. We also tried a trick here with 360 video where we went out and we clamped a camera to the edge of a helicopter flying over a glacier with a friend of mine who's here in the front row, actually in the camera here, in the helicopter.
Well, when you look at the glacier like that, from the vantage point of an helicopter, it looks like it's going to be here forever. How could it possibly go away?
So then what we did is we took that video and we put you in a volumetric helicopter, just like the actual helicopter that Catherine Uppen, who's here, was in. And then we put the 360 video on the outside, so you feel like you're flying over Greenland, which is melting. And to fly over the space, you start to get a much deeper understanding of what's really going on. And I think it's really important. Some of the scenes we didn't have it captured volumetrically, so we had to do some tricks in the digital room, taking this is a photograph that we flattened and then went in and actually had to make volumetric. So it gives you an idea of some of the crazy tool sets that are out there for making things volumetric now. And it ended up looking like this. So you could be on scene with him when he was speaking. We did the same thing for some underwater scenes, which there was no way we could give them volume without that kind of a tool. We also did some research in partnership with USC's Media Impact Partner on how successful was this VR, and found that it communicated both Kenny's physical state and his emotional condition, inspired interest in VR journalism, and that room scale, walk around, volumetric VR was the most effective platform because we showed people in 360 and we showed it to them on a screen. Similarly with Greenland, it was most effectively communicated in embodied ways. When you saw a time-lapse glacier retreat, or when you could go beneath the water to look at warm water ocean currents. And they liked the VR as room scale walk around better. So what's really cool about that piece, I think, is that it demystifies the science. You're in a plane when a scientist, NASA scientist, is dropping a tube down into the water to measure ocean temperature. So you kind of know that the scientists aren't really making the shit up, right? There's some belief in the climate change. This was a photograph that was sent to me last week. It's a scene at the National Physics Society, the American Physics Society, the largest gathering of physicists. And this was the session, R6 Science Policy in the Trump administration. I'm copying from his tweet down below. I mean, his text. There is none. So this is a quantum physicist walks into this room, and there's nobody there because we've got this crazy idea that there's something about science that isn't real. Like, we need humanities. We need to be able to tell that story. That's what humanities does. So we can't separate the two things anymore very clearly. We need VR, we need storytellers, we need ways to begin to convey this information. And this is what Greenland does. It demystifies the science in this way. So what are the things of demystified issues? Well, this is Mel and Mavi, who I mentioned earlier about responses if real. They were interested in the bystander effect. This is this very famous case in the New York Times who said this woman was killed and nobody did anything about it. And they rebuilt a scene where you walked into a bar and using really convincing material because they had all this footage from closing time at the pub. You know, you see the guy in the red, he's got the wrong jersey on, the other guy gets off the bar and he's ready to beat him up, right? And what they found was that the more people were there, the more likely was somebody who's going to actually do something about it. And in fact, the New York Times revisited their article. Psychology has this whole theory, bystander effect, right? That is real, that people don't actually help. But in fact, they were wrong. So on to the fake news question, which of course people are going to want to know about. What about VR and the possibility for fake news? So this was a Twitter thing during the French election, and that's a lie. She was never ahead 32%, right? Le Pen was never ahead. Some of you may know this war room moment when Hillary Clinton, as Secretary of State, was looking at the bin Laden assassination. And in the left, you'll see this is what some newspapers in the Middle East published because you can't have a woman in the room with the guys, right? So we know about doctoring imagery. I don't know if people know about this particular piece where they're able to take audio, recut the audio, and the video will actually lip sync to it, and you can't tell. So yeah, what's going to be truth here, right? And how do we get to veracity? This is my friend Hao Li, and what he's doing is able to make his face, motion capture his face, track his face, and put it on other people's bodies, and or his faces, and they look really realistic, and it's becoming more believable, right? Stanford also showed that most students don't know when news is fake. 82% of middle schoolers couldn't distinguish between something labeled sponsored content and a real news story on a website. So here's a great one. A lie can travel half around the world while the truth is putting on its shoes. Even though that turns out not necessarily to be attributed to Mark Twain, and that's a lie itself, that turned out to be right. Just this last week, folks from MIT showed that lies do spread faster than truth, and that the top 1% of false news cascades diffuse between 1,000 and 100,000 people, while truth rarely made it to more than 100,000 people. On top of all this, currently trust in American institutions is just falling like crazy. Like American democracy has fallen to troubling lows. And without trust, democracy can't function. I've got that quantum physicist who sent me that photograph, his wife came out of Russia, and she will talk all about the blending of stories where you never know what's true and what's not, and how that affects things. We're also living in this very, very dark and tense time in the way that we treat each other. Anti-Semitic incidents in the United States increased nearly 60% from 2016 to 2017, and the Anti-Defamation League, so in all of their history, they've never seen this kind of a jump. And obviously what we have to acknowledge, the death of some folks here in Austin who may be being targeted because of their race in the yesterday and this last couple of weeks. I don't believe we're meant to be this way. I think kindness can prevail. And I'm asking each and every one of you to go back out there into the world today and think about treating each other more kindly. And we've got to make a shift. We've got to together make a stand against this. So back to some fun. What do we do at Emblematic when I start getting about to cry? Well, we have a game we've been designing on great rock and roll hotel room trashings. So we put you on scene where you get to be there when shit is happening around you, right? And not only do you get to be there, but you get to have a lot of fun and splashes and trash, and that's our great MC. Scenes like driving, and you get to be there during iconic moments, cars going into pools, TVs going over balconies, and then you get to, they used to carry extra extension cords with them to make sure they had enough room. And of course, if you wanna staple hammer the furniture up to the ceiling, you need your friend, so it's multiplayer. Yeah, so you got to have a little bit of fun in doing this sort of thing as well. So a little bit of note on being a woman up here. I was invited to something called the Founders Forum in London, and all of a sudden, the next thing I know, they asked me to come have lunch with Prince William. I asked this handler, where should I sit? And she basically directed me across from Eric Schmidt from Google, who was sitting next to the Prince, and there was the guy who started Skype, and Jimmy Wales from Wikipedia. It was about 14 people, and I was like, oh, what am I doing here? And literally, and I ended up scurrying to the end of the table facing nobody. I just got really nervous. So I used to sort of say, like, oh, don't do what I did. You know, Cheryl is right, lean in. I used to blame myself for being a coward for not getting involved. But here are the numbers. Women just don't get funding. 2% of VC money goes to women, and year after year. So of course, you don't have money, you don't have power, you don't feel like you belong at that table. You don't feel like you should be facing Prince William. So again, if we could change some of that. So, you know, why should people be investing in Emblematic? Because we do such amazingly cool things. Like this is a fintech tool, and it's a live feed of the stock market. So you can spatially visualize everything that's going on through different sectors. And we've built this in VR and AR. If you have an Apple, any phone you have, you can download this and look at it immediately. It's on Apple and otherwise, right? We've also just begun something called Reach. I think this is an important thing. We think that it's a platform, and the idea is to give people an opportunity to make their own volumetric virtual reality. This idea for immersive walk-around content is growing. It's getting cheaper, more powerful headsets. And I was just at Qualcomm last Friday, and I was able to use their edge computing system. And what's edge computing? It means that the data is not being stored in the glasses and the goggles themselves. Edge computing means that the data is being stored offline in 5G networks and being streamed to your phone in the same way your 4G might send you data now. And the glasses that I saw, I was walking around wireless through a phone in their lab. So 5G is coming. It's being unrolled. AT&T is doing interesting work with it. And people are really keen on what kind of hard demos can we use to show the capacity of 5G. So don't be afraid. Like, don't be afraid to push the envelope. If you want to do some more data-intensive stuff, people are craving, you know, all the Verizon, AT&T, Qualcomm, all these Intel, they're all looking for things to show what 5G can do. And to show you a little bit more about Reach.
When I hear that women are unable to do technology,
this is a volumetric in the browser walk-around experience. So this is what we've built. I can send you a link right now for Firefox or Internet Explorer. It's not quite working in Chrome yet. But what I'm showing you is through a keyboard going through this. And it's purely photogrammetry, volumetric, but with the ability to drop people's stories in, right? And so it means that you could shoot your own story and drop them into the environment. And that's something we'll be launching this fall. So that's it. I'm ready for questions. Thank you very much. Okay, so I've got questions here. What's the killer app needed to bring VR to the mass consumer market? I think that the 5G edge computing is going to get us a lot closer. We need the distribution walls to fall. We feel like we are able to see that kind of stuff with reach, that we're able to start offering distribution ability that just didn't exist before. So there are a lot of ethical considerations. Like when you make a doc film, can you guys see these questions, by the way? I'll read them to you. In telling immersive stories, what are the ethical considerations for bringing people into the lives of those who suffered? So when you're making doc film or telling any kind of news story and you're trying to offer people the ability to engage with an important story, you need to work with the individuals whose story is being portrayed. For example, in the Kia story, which is so tragic, I spent a long time talking to the sisters and making sure that their story was reported the way they wanted to. They'd become activists in the anti-gun movement, and for them, this was they really wanted another opportunity. And the same thing as I showed with the Project Syria, how initially the Syrian woman who was coming to see the piece thought, like, how dare I? And then she saw it and felt really glad that we were doing this. So it's always a balance with how you report on people. How do you strike a balance? Oh, sorry, how does one manage trauma as a side effect of immersive media? We do, just like you do in other film, we put a warning at the start of our pieces to warn people that the content they're about to witness has can be distressing or difficult to watch. I know with hunger, I actually warned somebody off who said that somebody in their family had died having a seizure. So making sure that there's a note, a letter, some sort of information that lets people know what they're about to witness might be disturbing. How do you strike a balance in the representation of real VR footage versus staged footage? So we are really excited that we can start to do real stuff more and more, but sometimes it's only an audio capture, so we have to recreate it. So we try to make very, very detailed Bibles that we're really careful with everything that we represent, and that we've got really good documentation for what we're showing. It's kind of interesting because what is B-roll, right? We've had these big discussions about that, like, I think there's sort of fears of VR being fake, but we often take B-roll and throw it into something just to cover a cut in a voice without thinking that actually nobody cares if the cloud that you're showing or the puddle you're showing or the car zooming by you're showing is the real one that was on that scene. So I think we're kind of in that moment where we're trying to figure that out for virtual reality. So Apple's face recognition technology, it was actually a guy named, a company called FaceShift, and Hao Li was involved in that facial recognition, that company that's gone to Apple. And I think that, what are the Snapchat filters? How are they beneficial? I don't know if they're beneficial or not, other than we will want to be able to appear volumetrically. You're not going to want to appear flat. I remember going to see Sony in the late 1990s and going, written on staff on shows. It's like, look, we can make the whole things up on a website and show the fans. And they're like, what are you talking about? And now, I mean, this is impossible, right, in the late 1990s. But now I'm saying to people, we can make all the websites volumetric. They don't have to be flat anymore. And they're like, what are you talking about? So just know you heard it first, that websites aren't going to be flat, and you're not going to be flat, and your video is not going to be flat, and every phone is letting you scan things with volume, and it's going to let you scan yourself with volume and add facial movement, right, to these kind of facial recognition software. So it's all shifting and changing, and I think that that's a really important thing. What advance in VR hardware software are you most excited for on either the creation side or end user side? There's been some really fun theatrical pieces in VR. I don't know if you've gotten a chance to see any of them yet, where actors actually come in and in a way, the whole embodied walk-around content allows for theater to merge. So you've got people who are in performances in motion capture suit and they appear as like Alice in Wonderland, like the rabbit, or in which one case it's it's a retelling the story of a young man whose mother was dying of cancer, and you're with the actor playing the mother, and she's touching you and tucking you into bed. It's a really weird experience. So that's super interesting. And then, of course, I was just mentioning the tech that I think is the most interesting. AR and VR developing, it's together. I mean, for anybody who develops in these platforms, when you learn how to do one, you know how to do the other. You're just generally, anything we make, we can export either as a VR or as an AR. You do have to think a little bit about what's the experience going to be like for the end user and how to design that slightly differently. But the heavy lifting of the production, if you can learn, some of the production tools like Unity or Unreal, you just do an export into AR versus VR. So I'm going to skip to, could the VR experiences be used to help traumatized people move forward? God, you guys gave me a lot of questions. I need to breathe for a minute, sorry. Okay. There's been some really interesting work on burn victims, if people are familiar with that. The children who've been in a headset, being penguins sliding down snowy mountains, when their bandages were changed, their level of pain reported was in some cases less than being given morphine. So I think the other way of, that's one way. There's Skip Rizzo, I think he's speaking at 3 today. He can talk to you about his work in PTSD and using VR to help people with PTSD very, very successfully. Okay, what are the biggest ethical concerns in VR? I think I kind of addressed it in my talk. Do people still want me to answer this question? Shout out yes if you do. All right, one person? I can try again. Catherine, why don't you come up here and answer that one? To somebody who's a seasoned journalist. So the ethical concerns are just, many of them are the same concerns that you have when you do regular news reporting. How do you ensure the accuracy? How do you know the background material? But this goes into the fake news, right? So if I'm able to recreate stuff in a way that people think is real and they trust it as being real, what are we going to do? Well, we need critical thinking. We need critical thinking. We need to teach those middle schoolers that they have to look at the source, that they have to figure out the veracity of something. They need to be, we need to put money in education. We keep cutting education. And we need to put money in education so folks can engage again with these really important issues of trust and democracy. So if people want to start telling immersive stories with VR volumetric imagery, my advice to you is there's a real beautiful window right now in photogrammetry. You can go to Reality Capture, which is the Autodesk program, and start experimenting. We've had some success with just an iPhone camera, and you're just taking hundreds of photographs. DSLR, hundreds of photographs, and then the program will stitch it together like I showed you in that statue. So I think that there's, we're at a Getty moment where lots and lots of volumetric places can be captured. We're going to hopefully offer some sort of a marketplace on Reach, so if you capture those spaces, that we can let other people use them for some sort of fee that goes to you. Fictional storytelling. That, I don't know, I've decided I really want to. How many people here are familiar with Carl Theodor Dreyer's Joan of Arc? People know that piece? Not too many, but it doesn't really matter. I want to do a Joan of Arc piece. So I want to do a fictional piece around Joan of Arc. I think it's historical. There's the trial records actually exist of Joan of Arc, so it's got a really nice historical documentary possibility. But doing it in virtual reality when you're there could be just super amazing. She gets her hair hacked off. You're standing there with these locks of hair fall down in front of you. Anyway, so that's a fictional piece I mentioned, and you're going to see a lot more of VR. Again, why would you don't experience your world as flat. You experience your world with volume. Why would you have all your entertainment be that way? I'm not going to say that radio is going away. Radio is stronger than ever, right? Podcasts are stronger than ever. Film will be around, but this medium is still waiting for the content makers to come in and turn it into something special. well, already we're seeing New York Times, Gannett. There's a bunch of, obviously we were working with PBS, with Frontline and Nova. So there's lots of big publishers out there trying to get VR off the ground. I think when watching the costs come down, I think that's going to be a big differentiator. All right, I see there's some mics in the room. If anybody else who didn't send a question wants to ask a question, we have 2 minutes and 40 seconds left. Anybody else? Oh, here comes somebody. Here comes 2 people. Okay.
Have you considered taking on the gun violence in schools through this?
You mean bullying in schools?
No.
Sorry, what'd you say?
Gun violence.
Oh, gun violence. Yeah, I mean, both my kids were on. I just put them both on the bus, and then the school emergency came through. Campus was being closed because somebody had tweeted a shotgun with the school's name on it and saying either it's something like homicide or suicide are your only options. And the school, it turned out to be a former student who went on to play for the Miami Dolphins and was suffering from depression, whatever. So all of a sudden, I had to frantically try to find my kids, and there's somebody with a gun out there, right? So it's a very personal issue, and I've been trying to tease that apart to think about how can I do something in VR, and how do I deal with what, as a mother, I'm like, oh crap, I need to buy a moped because I'll never get through LA traffic to get my kids in time if I don't, right? I mean, literally, I'm thinking about getting a moped license. So because of that incident, and that's my personal thing, so I think there's something there for sure.
You've done some very powerful work in raising awareness, and I'm just very curious about how do you manage people using your technology or platform for things that don't align with your values?
So bizarrely, I got invited after that Gitmo thing I was still at USC, and they invited me to this castle in England, and I turned out to be with all these intelligence officers from Canada, Australia, and some from the US and the UK. And they were showing the Gitmo piece and saying, you see, this is the kind of technology that at that time was like the Taliban, they thought, before ISIS became a name. And they were so angry at me for making that Gitmo piece, right? So it's kind of one of those things, right? What can you do? You can't really stop people from using your content anyway, any more than they could stop me from telling a story that I felt was important to tell. Our only hope is that, again, we can try to think about critical thinking, and my message of kindness hopefully went out into the world.
Hi, thank you. And since now we get more and more accustomed to VR experiences, do you think the effect of the VR as an empathy machine will decline because we get so used to it and kind of interpret it through fiction?
Yeah, bad storytelling is just not going to work, right? Good storytelling in documentary always works. So I don't think it's going to decline in VR, and I think that embodied experience is unique. I think, because of hunger, we got this whole empathy thing so quickly because that was the story that I needed to tell. But I think that there is an engagement there. Like, I kind of went the other way. I was like, okay, this empathy thing's really overwrought, and everybody's going empathy, empathy, empathy. Come on, this has got to be too much. And I backed away from it and then thought about it. But then I'm back. I'm back feeling like I just don't see people reacting in the same way. Like, they don't get what it's like when a glacier's melting unless they're on the side of a bloody glacier while it's retreating. Or what's it like to be locked in a tiny little cell unless they're in the cell. So it's a unique medium, and I'm going to fight for my belief in it again. And then you can come back and show me how wrong I am, and then I'll be wrong for a while, and then I'll figure out some other way. But anyway, always open. Last question, please.
Hi. I was wondering to what extent you think architects and the design of virtual spaces, VR environments, have to perhaps impact the stories that people are telling, or is that a consideration?
I think that architects have been early adopters of the technology because it's so good for creating spatial environments that you can test and be around. And what would be nice about that would be maybe they're able to use it to think about what the impact of what they build are. You know, we know what development is like. I was crying when I was watching down my neighborhood, and I'm nuts, I suppose. But when I saw another huge old tree being ripped down for a big box house, right? So one will only hope that maybe we need to teach those developers some empathy for building things that aren't going to be so great for our climate change. So, thank you guys so much for coming. I really appreciate it. And thanks again.